So I'm Anastasia Kavada and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster. And I've been an activist as well for a while. Initially, I'm from Greece, but I've been living in London in the last 14 years. And initially I was an activist here for Greenpeace and Amnesty International. Then I was active in the global justice movement and different movements after that.
My name is Rodrigo Nunes. I'm a lecturer in philosophy at the Catholic University of Rio. I am from Rio, from Brazil, and I am based there now, but I also have been based, or a while ago I was based in Europe for 6 years. In that period I was involved in several different initiatives here in Europe, in labour organising, migrant organising, and also in Brazil I've been active in several different projects and initiatives, such as, for example, the first 3 editions of the World Social Forum.
For me, there are many levels that we need to be working on, and also many decisions that we need to be taking. First of all, which movements are we talking about? Because we were talking about what does this no mean, the no to Europe. And on the one hand, I think that, for example, movements, it's not only movements of the left, and I think there's a broader consensus that we need to mobilize here against austerity, on the one hand. On the other hand, we have very strange bedfellows here that we don't really want to be with. So actors from the far right, which is not the people, they may be against the EU at the moment, but it's not the people that you necessarily want to work with, you don't want to work with. So thinking about those kinds of alliances, who are the people who are behind you? Who are the people that you would like to mobilize, and for what? I think is one of the main questions here. At least for Greece, the referendum was phrased in a way that was a little bit ambivalent, and if you actually look at research, it looks that people voted no for many, many different reasons. So in a way, I think the question also is not what the no means, but what we would like to make it mean. So this is sort of like constructing a counter-narrative and then getting people behind us. So I think this is what we need to be thinking about. Another level has to do with tactical interventions on the EU level. And I think this is another decision that needs to be made over there. So do we want to be part of this European Union, or do we want to be part of a monetary union? And if we do, then what sort of institutions do we want to see? If we don't want to be part of it, then it's a completely different struggle. And to be honest, after all these days here, I wasn't really sure. There was a lot of discussion around Brexit and around Greece's position within the European Union, but here we're talking about a European problem. So it's a completely different, I think, discussion that we need to be having, because it implies a different strategy over there. And another issue that for me is really, really the most important one, what keeps me up at night is what happens when we win. Because right, the resistance is great. Toppling regimes and trying to change things and destroy things, yes, there are certain institutions that need to be changed, that need to be reformed, but I think that we need to be building alternatives. Alternative ways of thinking about things, alternative structures. So we talked about solidarity projects and the flourishing of such solidarity projects that gained a lot of support in Greece, but also in other countries. So I think we already need to start putting together the kinds of structures that can sort of like offer an alternative, because otherwise what you have is toppling one regime and then having the same regime with just different people. So I think that institutional change needs new institutions.
New institutions on a local level, in terms of, for example, solidarity initiatives, on a national level and on the transnational level, which now has been proven to be a big problem in Europe. Personally, as a non-European who shouldn't be meddling in you people's affairs. Personally, I would say I'm in favor of breaking up the monetary union. I think the monetary union is clearly, always was a bad idea, and now is a very, very bad idea. But of course, I would, ideally, the struggles that I would like to see in Europe wouldn't be about simply returning to the nation state or framing politics exclusively from the perspective of the nation state, which would be something that would differentiate a radical left perspective for Europe from a far-right project. So obviously what has to start happening now is movements need to start organizing in their national context, because everyone is feeling the pinch of austerity. Everyone is feeling the pinch of the crisis. Everyone is increasingly shocked at what the European project has become, not only with what's just happened to Greece, but also what's been happening almost on a weekly basis in the Mediterranean with the deaths of thousands of migrants. But organizing in the local context, organizing in the national context, shouldn't be about recentering politics on the nation state. It should be, there is nowhere else in the world where it's actually possible to develop a transnational discourse, a transnational political project. It's only here. And it would be a shame if the left abandoned that perspective. So how do you do that? How do you create a discourse that at the same time connects the different national contexts and has a transnational perspective? Obviously, I don't have the answer to that question. I think, for example, one of the angles that it might be worth considering as angles to be explored here is the generational angle. You know, all over Europe, you have a growing gap. You have growing social gaps of all kinds, but one way of representing all those gaps that are opening up is actually as a generational gap. Europe is more and more gerontocratic project that is dealing its young people be they young migrants, be they second generation migrants, be they actually Greek nationals, German nationals, etc., etc. They are being dealt a worse and worse hand by their own countries, by their own institutions, and maybe this would be one angle from which to organize a transnational discourse.
Yes, I find that in a way, whenever you start talking about the young generation, you know, these are the people who are not to blame. So if we were to plan something, we plan something for them. And I think that this is this can be really powerful because, you know, if you think about forgiving debts, you forgive the debts because the new generation, you know, they're not the ones who incur the debts. So you can't also condemn them because their parents and grandparents and everybody else made mistakes.
Well, and more, the structural setup means that the only way they can get anywhere is by acquiring more and more debt.
Yes.
So, and when I say young people, I'm also thinking of people like who finished their PhDs more or less at the same time as we did, who are brilliant people, who are incredibly capable people, who can't find a proper job in academia in Europe nowadays. For example, people who are moving to Brazil all over the place, or are staying here and in precarious conditions. So this is actually something like a generational narrative, I think, speaks to everything from this position, which is relatively privileged, someone who did a PhD, even if nowadays someone who did a PhD is probably someone who's going to be deeply in debt at the end of their PhD, all the way to like the poor, unskilled migrant or second generation migrant who also experience racism, increasing racism, police violence, etc., etc.
I think precarity is something that we all experience more and more. Precarity is our condition within neoliberalism. It doesn't matter whether we have a job or not. It's becoming increasingly unstable, temporary. But coming back to one of the points that you made earlier, I do agree with you that it's a European or transnational project, really. One of the issues with austerity is that it becomes a national issue because it is being enforced by national government.
Yeah.
In a way, depending on the nation state you're based in, you have a different experience of austerity and different discourses around austerity. So here finding the common threads, I think, is quite important. The common logic behind that, the common threads, the common experiences. There's another issue here. I think that nobody wants austerity. There's a few people who don't experience it, who might want it for others, right? But nobody wants it. Nobody thinks it's a good thing, right? Everybody knows that it is painful. So by simply saying, oh, this is painful, look what you're doing to people, you're making them precarious, you're making this and the other thing, is not enough if people do not think that there is an alternative, there's a way out, there's another way of doing things. So I'm based in the UK. People voted in and now a majority Tory government based, the main issue was the economy, and they thought that they could deal with the economy in a much better way. Not because they wanted more austerity, but because they're afraid. They're afraid that, if Labour was voted into power, they wouldn't deal with the economy the way they were. So I think that there is another argument to be made here, another vision around how we should organize ourselves, like economically, in a way that is sustainable. And here is where I think that also, solidarity economics, other types of economics are extremely important.